We are joined by fellow AEST TV host Daisy Cousens. You can catch the Daisy Cousens show on Fridays at 7 p.m. and Kaleidoscope on Mondays at 10 p.m. Daisy, welcome to Spectator TV.
Thank you so much for having me, Alexandra. I'm very, very pleased to be here and doing this interview.
Well, you are a Specky favourite, Daisy. And look, I was having a chat to James Allen earlier in the show, who attended the rally against digital ID as you did over the weekend in Brisbane. Now, indeed, there were lots of conservative and libertarian figures taking the stage and speaking out against, tyranny and the government in general. This isn't normal for conservatives to do. We're not fond of the protest lifestyle like the left, who seem to come out every other weekend with some new world-ending apocalypse. Do you think conservatives, such as yourself, are evolving to be more vocal, or are these topics simply too important to stay quiet over?
I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, as you mentioned, protesting and going rah-rah is not really the conservative way, because I suppose conservatism is not what you call a reactionary ideology, whereas, progressivism and leftism is all about tearing things down, and in order to do that you need to make a lot of noise. But conservatism, I mean, it's about conserving. I mean, it's in the name. We're conserving things, and to do that, you don't go out. There's no need to go out and protest. It's a matter of kind of going, whoa, Nelly, and pulling on the reins. So it was interesting to see so many people who were on the right at that rally. I think possibly it is such an important issue, and I think because of what Australians went through during the COVID years, I think a lot of conservatives especially were awakened to how insidious big government can be. So it's quite possible we will see more and more conservative and right-leaning people protesting in the future. And also the other thing is, I think everyone can be concerned about the digital ID. So it's possible there were a lot of people there who've maybe never been interested in politics before ever in their lives, but see what's happening to our country, didn't like the way our politicians treated us during the COVID years, and see this digital ID as a very worrying extension of that. So they turned up as well.
Well, you're right. There was quite a bit of overlap between people who were protesting or wanted to protest during COVID and those who were there at digital ID. But there were also quite a lot of new faces there of people who maybe followed politics but have never attended a rally before. I had a lot of first-time rally goers at our function down in Sydney. Now, it would be fair to say that you and I are the first generation to be raised with technology forming a large part of our lives. Yeah. And yet we are more sceptical of technology's limitations than, say, Gen Z, who have had smartphones handed to them as infants practically. Now, as an online influencer and an independent media personality who requires the internet for business, how would you describe your relationship with the internet? Do you, fully trust it and adore it, or are you a little bit sceptical about it?
Oh my God, I hate the internet. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate everything about it. I mean, obviously, the internet has been a force for good in a lot of ways. It's made us, more interconnected than we've ever been before in all of human history by far. But I think that's also a bad thing. Things actually aren't meant to move this fast. I think that's why anxiety is one of the reasons that anxiety is so rampant amongst millennials and Generation Z is because they have everything fed to them so quickly. Whereas until very, 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 very recently, things took time. You had to wait a few days for a letter to arrive. In the olden days, you had to wait 2 weeks for a letter to arrive. There was none of this kind of instant stuff. So I think it is responsible for the degradation of the mental health of at least 2 generations of people. Having said that, we're in a situation where the internet is so integral to the way we live our lives and indeed the way that we conduct business. It's a matter of sort of having to make peace with it and to manage, have sort of coping strategies. And as you mentioned, we were kind of lucky, you and I, in the fact that we grew up, yes, with the internet, but it was still very much in its beta stages. I think I didn't have Facebook until my first year of university. So I went all the way throughout high school without having any form of social media except for MSN Messenger. So we were kind of weaned onto it, if that makes any sense. So we've been the luckiest. But as you said, these new generations of kids have had smartphones since they were very, very, very young. They get Instagram accounts. They beg their parents for Instagram accounts when they're very, very, very young. And it's given them a completely warped idea of humanity and how human beings should relate to each other. And I think they probably have absolutely no attention span because they're used to receiving everything so easily. I think it has caused a lot of damage. Having said that, again, we're sort of past the point of no return with it. So I think the next few years actually might be characterized by young people trying to call a halt on this sort of internet addiction that they might have and finding ways of managing it and coping with it that don't involve it chewing up all of their lives.
Well, you're right about attention spans. We have a generation who have instantaneous access to all the world's knowledge, but they lack the patience to read it.
Yeah.
And that's almost the same as having no information at all. But the digital ID itself is about formalising the relationship between social media, the corporate landscape, our economic landscape, and our education world of every citizen. So no longer do we have these separate spaces where you have a YouTube persona and then you go off to your office job like we used to do a long time ago. So the government is not only consolidating an identification, as it suggests, but they're also consolidating citizen data. Does that particularly make you uncomfortable that it's almost like a new technical age where you no longer have any privacy from the other parts of your life, whereas before you could segment your life? You know, your sports club didn't know what your political views were, but that is no longer the case.
No, I hate the idea of the government having sort of a centralised point that has all of my data, because as I said in my speech at the rally, and Topher Field said this to me last week when I interviewed him on Kaleidoscope, you know, why should the government have any more of our data than they already have? They don't deserve it. They have not proven that they can be trusted to handle information about their citizens responsibly. I mean, look at all of the tracking that went on during COVID, for instance. You know, all of that data pool sort of still sits there. I hate the idea of it. I hate it on principle. I hate it in practicality. It is very, very easy. You can imagine if you've got these data honeypots sitting there, how foreign powers, hostile powers like China or Russia might want to hack into that to learn about Australian citizens. It's a security risk. I can't stand the idea. And like I said, politicians, they don't deserve it. And I know they tried to put safeguards in this bill, but you know, what's to stop them selling this data to big corporations, for instance, who are trying to organise their marketing? It's a terrible idea.
Daisy, you're so right about the honeypot problem of technology, because at the moment, I mean, I've had to have a lot of work of dealing with the government's databases and servers. The only reason North Korea has not stolen our data is because the current databases are so old and so difficult for anybody to even access that they may as well be filing cabinets buried in the Australian desert. That's why the North Koreans haven't got there yet. So that's what's keeping us safe, the absolute terrible state of them. But, you know, it's almost as if, and you had a really good point there a little while ago, that as if technology is the parent of Gen Z and they love it unconditionally, even if it's destroying their lives. And we've also had those terrible TikTok crazes where, you know, children were being rewarded for faking borderline personality disorders, and some even died when they were trying to copy these dangerous trends. And then you've got questionable figures influencing the next generation. I've just got a quick clip of your interview with Sydney Watson on the Andrew Tate phenomena.
I think Andrew Tate's rhetoric, again, is especially damaging because it's gone mainstream. And you have these like 9-year-old kids that are in schools being like, I don't know if you've seen, there's a clip where one of his little acolytes called Sneeko is at some event, and this kid walks up, grabs a microphone and goes like, you know, F women, right? Like, screw women.
Now, look, if it was just that kind of thing, parents could definitely show their evolved with it. They could teach their children over a few generations. I think we'd get used to it. It wouldn't be a problem. But do you think that the problems really started when the government decided to involve itself in the internet and the government decided that the internet was a tool for power? Because I watched this evolve. That's, I think, the line that was crossed for me. Do you think that might be a point?
Look, I have a personal motto, Alexandra, and that's anything government touches turns to excrement, to use a television, a polite television word. I don't think there is any good to come from the government touching the internet any more than it has to. Obviously, there are certain laws that need to be adhered to about content in terms of, say, child abuse material or animal abuse material. Nobody wants that up there unless you're a terrible, creepy person. You know, so there are certain things things maybe the government does have to monitor. But the minute they start, doing these biffos with Elon Musk, for instance, about what he can and can't post internationally on his platform, the minute they start, having beef with Meta, I mean, I was literally just watching television a little while ago. I saw a headline. Breaking news: the government launches some other investigation into social media and tech tyrants. There is this obsession that governments have nowadays with what citizens say on the internet. And I think it's because the internet has provided a very handy place for political dissidents to make their voices heard and to augment those voices, and people listen to them, which is an absolute curse for politicians because the political environment is not as controllable as it was even 10 years ago. So no, the government touching the internet any more than it has to is always going to be a terrible, terrible idea. And I think the digital ID is a last-ditch attempt by governments to try to wrangle back some control.
Well, I don't see it as being much different to when the government started trying to crack down on the printing presses in the old days during the revolutions, when they didn't want anybody to print or read things they did not like. It's the same thing, just a different medium when it comes to that. But also, it's eyeballs. So when they put out a publicity message saying, I'm going to promise your power bill is going to be cheaper, like someone who may not be named has said, everyone can now publish contrary information which challenges the government narrative, and millions of people will see that. Whereas before, you couldn't hand out millions of flyers very easily. So it's an instantaneous rebuke of government propaganda.
Yeah.
But you did return to digital ID here, and I want to have a final question on this one. There is a generation or two above us, Daisy, who completely missed the digital revolution. So they certainly use technology, but the internet lacks, shall we say, depth for them. Most do not venture beyond the mainstream digital news and then social media. So for them, logging onto this new era of government departments and trying to get a MyGov app and all the rest of it, it's a pain in the neck, and they'd rather not deal with it. So it's these people, the bulk of the adult population, that the government has pitched digital ID to, and all their marketing campaigns say it'll make it faster, it'll make it easier to talk to the government. Is this the government bribing people with convenience in the same way that perhaps the government likes to bribe people with handouts?
I think so. Definitely. I mean, modern life is so fast-paced. I mean, people barely have time to scratch themselves nowadays. Even people who are retired. I have a friend who retired recently, and she says she's busier in retirement than she was in working life because, she's doing all sorts of other things. And because, as I said, everything moves so quickly, there's no time to just stop, for even sort of 5 minutes. So I think convenience, much like safety, is a very, very good selling point for the public, a sort of an overworked, underpaid, exhausted general public who has so many pots in so many different fires, and the idea of having everything in one place would certainly, for a lot of people, seem, well, very, very convenient and very, very easy. But it's just so important to remind those people that, that you should never take what your government says at face value. Ultimately, like everyone else, major party politicians especially, are just trying to keep their jobs. Ultimately, everyone wants to keep their jobs, especially nowadays. Politicians are no different. They want your vote, and they will skew any kind of information. They'll stretch it in any way they possibly can in order to get your vote. So if they're telling you, oh, the digital ID, well, it'll just make everything really, really convenient for you. Ask yourself why they're saying that, and think through what other consequences there could be of the government having all of your data in one place.
Well, Daisy, you've got two amazing shows on AEST TV every single week. You've got great guests, and I say all of our viewers should go and watch Daisy because she's wonderful, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here today on Spectator TV.
Well, thank you so much, Alexandra, for having me. This was really, really good fun, and of course, I love all of your shows too, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Daisy.